This is Corey from World Music Nashville, and you are listening to The Business Side of Music.
Success in the music business begins with a dream, a vision. This podcast will give you, the listener, the insight and tools to turn that vision into a reality. Meet the industry professionals who work day by day behind the scenes, helping to make those dreams come true. Welcome to The Business Side of Music.
This is Bob Bender. You're listening to this edition of The Business Side of Music. Today in the studio, we have Dirk K. Had the opportunity to meet Dirk a few years ago. We were talking about it before the show started. I was producing and hosting a radio show, jazz radio show back in the day, and Dirk was one of the artists that we shared his music, and he and I wound up connecting a couple of years later in Las Vegas, Nevada, where he resides. Originally from Germany, Dirk refined his studies at the Guitar Institute of Technology in Hollywood, California, along with the Berklee School of Music in Boston. He, as I said, now resides in Las Vegas. As an accomplished guitarist whose career began in the early 1990s, he's released 14 CDs as a recording artist on Sony, Bellophone, Fuzzy Music, and now on his own independent label, DIP Records. In addition, Dirk K has released 8 CDs with band projects and produced and recorded over 30 CDs for other artists. His unique guitar style blends jazz, flamenco, and Brazilian music. Dirk has performed and recorded with renowned artists including Randy Brecker, Peter Erskine, Eric Marienthal, Toots Thielemans, Dave Weckl, Brandon Fields, Mark Johnson, Terry Lynn Carrington, Gary Meek, and Rick Braun, just to name a few. He's toured the U.S. and Europe with his band, which included trumpeter Randy Brecker, saxophonist Annie Middleton, and pianist Alan Pasqua. Dirk has just released his most current album titled Blue Sky. Dirk, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Bob. Honored to be here.
So I have to ask you, why jazz?
Well, when I was a teenager, kind of got started to play in a band where we had like kind of a school band, and we had the other guitar player in the band. He was so much better than me, and he said, well, you should really take some lessons from my teacher. He's great. And he was a jazz teacher, so I went there first lesson. He introduced me basically to Wes Montgomery and George Benson, like right up in the first class, and that was it. So ended up actually playing, improvising over a song in my first lesson from Thelonious Monk, Nostalgia in Times Square. So it was crazy.
Wow.
And so I just kept going ever since, and that was my first influence. Also, the at the time, very popular music was George Benson, Al Jarreau, Earth, Wind & Fire. This was kind of the very jazzy, soulful music, which was actually in the radio and was very commercial back then.
You started playing jazz guitar. That got you to the United States?
Yes, eventually, because I started in Germany when I finished my school. But at the last couple years of my school, I already started playing jazz in Germany with the local groups, with the top bands. Played pretty much in all the clubs you could possibly play at. And so I was kind of thinking about taking the next step. And the other thing was that any project I did, and I back then you had to have a record deal. So every time I talked to a record company, they basically always told me the same thing. Your music sounds too American. And at some point I said, well, I guess either I do something else or I go to America. And so that's kind of what transpired the move.
Your influences, you mentioned George Benson and Wes Montgomery. Were there any others out there?
Yeah, this was just kind of like the start, but then I got also introduced to guitar players like Pat Metheny, Lee Ritenour, Earl Klug. A lot of those guys I still listen to and still admire. Later, I got into also, John Scofield, John Abercrombie, which I actually took a few lessons with. And so lots of guitar players, but also horn players like Coltrane, Parker, Michael Brecker, all the good stuff,
How did you hook up with the likes of Randy Brecker?
Well, basically, the first time, that was my debut album, which I recorded in Germany, in my hometown, Aachen. I put this together for a while. So we started reaching out to a lot of different musicians. Also, basically, my plan was I had a certain vision for the album, which I kind of knew who I wanted to ask to play on what kind of song. And what I did was get those guys like Randy Brecker. He just happened to be on a Europe tour. So I just coordinated with him a day where he is off, and we picked him up. I don't remember where, and then brought him to the studio for a day, and then brought him back wherever he had to go next. So it kind of worked out great, because most of those musicians are actually pretty much touring all the time. So it's actually easy to get them at some point, when you kind of like reach out and show him the music and say, look, this is what we're going to do. And he really liked it. So he came over, and he was done so fast, it was crazy, But then I was able to also get Toots Thielemans on my debut album, which we recorded in Brussels, which is only a couple hours away from my hometown too. And so yeah, it was a great experience. And of course, I was just in my early 20s, so this was really terrifying in some ways.
When you mention the names like, Randy Brecker and Toots Thielemans, I mean, these guys in the jazz music scene, I mean, they're the legends. And of course, you mentioned Pat Metheny, and anybody that knows me and listens to especially my jazz show knows I'm a huge Pat Metheny fan and been listening to him since the 1970s. So,
of course,
I mean, you're working with just some iconic legends there.
Yes, absolutely. And we got very fortunate. In the same year, 1991, we recorded this album, basically my debut Dirk K album. But I also recorded a debut album with my brother, which is a bass player, J.K. Kloitkins. And we were able to get Dave Weckl on this and did a live recording with Dave, also in our hometown in Aachen, which he was just happened to be on a tour with the Electric Band and had a few days off. And
wow.
And we just did the whole album in one day, literally. So both of those CDs got released in 1992 and came out on great labels. Mine was on Bellaphone, which is still a major record label in Germany, and the other one was on Lipstick Records, which was basically the fusion label at the time.
You mentioned something, you knocked this out, especially with Weckl in one day. I read somewhere a while back when Pat Metheny went in to record his first Circle CD, which was on ECM Records. They did the whole thing, which I think was 8 cuts. They did the whole thing, which includes recording, mixing, and mastering. They did it in 3 days. Does that kind of seem to be the norm for jazz?
It just depends on what kind of jazz, So if you have really improvised bass jazz and you were able to play all at the same time, and the repertoire, the music, it's very common. I did a lot of CDs like this where I just put 4 people in a studio and boom, you hit recording, and usually 4, 5, 6 hours later we're done. And then of course you need another day of mixing maybe, or 2, it depends on what you want to do. Or sometimes, eventually maybe you have a couple of overdubs, but overall I like to keep the freshness of that first or second take, what we did on this day, and I don't like to really manipulate with it. But in terms of like the smooth jazz albums I'm doing, it's different because they're more produced. So you have tons of overdubs. You have a lot of sometimes programming of drum computers or a certain keyboard. So that takes a way longer time to actually create an album. But in the end, I always say if it comes out good, it doesn't matter how you get there.
Exactly. And so with that in mind, like I said earlier, you've 14 CDs in addition to 8 that you did with band projects. You've got over 30 CDs out there listening to your library of music. It was interesting to come up with what I wanted to share on the show. Of course, what I enjoy, my flavor, but I want to end this segment with a cut off your 1992 Fly to LA album, Karaoke. Tell us a little bit about that song.
Actually, it's kind of interesting. It's very much based on a Brazilian groove, and it's in somewhat a Brazilian composition. It's an original, but Carioca is the basically that's what they call the people who live in Rio de Janeiro. And so I named it after that because this song is just such a Brazilian influenced composition. And I wrote it actually in Berklee School of Music. I was there for a short while. And so I actually wrote it in Berklee, I still remember that, in 1989, maybe. And somewhere there, kind of did the whole composition fairly fast. And then I ended up recording it for my debut CD in 1991 on Fly to LA. So
as we fade out for our sponsors here, let's listen to Karaoke off the 1992 Fly to LA album, Dirk K. You're listening to this edition of the Business Side of Music.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Hi, this is Vinny Rebus, the founder of Indie Connect. Our goal is to ensure that you have the knowledge, the tools, skills, resources, and connections that you need to develop a profitable and long-lasting career in music. One way we do this is through these Business Side of Music podcasts. I'd also like to invite you to check out Indie Connect magazine, our free multimedia online publication packed with practical interviews and advice from music industry experts. Go to www.indieconnectmag. That's www.indieconnectmag.com. Let us walk with you and guide you every step of your musical journey.
You're listening to the business side of music.
This is Bob Bender. You're listening to this edition of the Business Side of Music. In the studio with us today, jazz guitarist Dirk K. We finished off the first segment with his song Karaoke off his 1992 Fly to LA album. We're going to play some more cuts in the next couple segments here so you get a real good idea of his music. Definitely check him out on not only Facebook, but his website, and we'll give you that information before the show's over. Check him out on YouTube. That's where I go a lot of times to listen to music. And Dirk, I got to say, it is a deep pool of just amazing music that you've released over the years.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. And I mean, really, you got to spend some time listening to, I started, okay, I'm going to pick the songs for the show. Which ones am I going to do? And I go, man, I love this one. And then I was like, no, I like this one more. And I'm scratching on my notepad. No, I love this one more. So it was tough, especially in my role, when I produce a jazz show, we typically will run a 3-hour show. And in that period of time, we'll get 5 to 7, maybe 9 songs per segment, and so you make it difficult, which is a compliment. So.
Thank you.
But I want to ask you, so original songs. Let's back up a moment. You do cover some tunes from other artists on your projects. How do you go about picking those?
Well, the whole thing I started off just writing my original music, really, since I'm 15 years old. But at some point, I started kind of playing the same venues in Orange County, Los Angeles area. More and more people asked me to do some standards. So at some point, I said, well, okay, I'm going to do standard CD. And then it became so successful, I followed up with another standard CD and another one, and it ended up being like 4 standard CDs, which people just love the old tunes. And I just completely read it in my way. I never saw reason of just doing a song like, how it is originally meant or already recorded by one of the best players probably out there. So I always tried to give it my own take or own flavor. But so I did about 4 albums with the jazz standards, as you will, like from Fly Me to the Moon to even Girl from Ipanema to all those songs. One is strictly Joe Beam music, so it's all Antonio Carlos, Joe Beam's compositions. Mm-hmm. But on the newer CDs, I did actually thought about it quite a bit to find some really cool songs and make unique covers. So for example, my last album, It's On, I did 50-50, so 5 originals, 5 covers, and one of them is, for example, the Love Song by The Cure, but it's completely different. And I did a very cool version of Toxic by Britney Spears. It's funny when I play it live, you always can see people are just this, I know the song, oh God, it's just always this aha moment with everybody, and like, oh, I cannot believe this is Toxic. It's kind of because it's so different than the original, but it's just a great song, and put it out and do my own twist on them as you will. So on my brand new album, I only did 1 cover, and that's Fragile by Sting. I always loved the song, but I did kind of a medium up-tempo samba version of it too. So it's a little different than the original as well. And but I really go, if I choose those songs, I just go by like what I like, and then just try to make it my own, really.
When you do write your own material, you write your own songs, where does your inspiration come from? I mean, we talk to a lot of songwriters on the show, but most of them are rock or they are country. But jazz is a totally different thing. And obviously, whether you listen to Metheny or you listen to Joe Beam, back in the 60s, I grew up listening to Sergio Mendes and the Brazil 66, which really got my foot in the door on jazz music, especially Brazilian jazz.
Oh, absolutely.
Where do you get your inspiration when you come up with the songs for your project?
For me, it was a natural progression of just learning to play the guitar, and composing kind of started at the same time. So basically, since I'm 15, 16, I started writing songs, and the very first song I actually wrote was Fly to LA, which is the title track of my very first album when I was just 15, I think, or maybe even younger. So it was like one of the first tunes. And what usually happens is I kind of play around with a certain progression or with a certain idea, and then it just kind of clicks and it just takes off from there. I have to be in a certain kind of mood, I guess. In order to write, you have to be kind of a little bit carefree. You cannot think too much about other things. Right. Overall, it's just like I've been writing probably 200-300 compositions by now, and a lot of them are on CD now, actually. I would say I've probably, about 22 albums with original music, and then again some are even ended up on somebody else's CDs as well. And so for me it was just a natural thing. Sometimes it could be just like a lick I'm playing around with on the guitar, or something new I learned. So it's really no rules. Something is happening, and I'm obviously working with the instrument, so I never just sit down and I have these ideas in my head. I usually work it out with my guitar. So at the same time, so.
Obviously, living in Los Angeles, getting a chance to go to the beach. Now you live in Las Vegas. I mean, is there a certain element or component of Las Vegas that inspires you when you write songs?
I don't know per se. I think I'm more introvert than extrovert kind of guy. I'm sure everything kind of in some way, changes you. Yes.
Yeah, the reason I ask that is because, I mean, obviously Las Vegas is not a big jazz town, at least not that I know of, in comparison to, say, New York or to L.A., Chicago. What drives you?
Well, it's just, for me, it's just a natural thing to do, to be honest. And it wouldn't matter really where I live. Here, I just have a lot of work. And for me, it's a good base to be at. And I also do traveling, of course, but there's also locally a lot of work available. So it gives me kind of a good base to be able to do what I want to do, to be able to write and stuff. And I don't have to think too much about, paying bills or whatever else, And
Gotcha.
but if Las Vegas influences me in a way on my writing, I don't think so. I don't think that's the case. But Las Vegas is definitely more upcoming for jazz now because a lot of people from LA actually are moving here, or more and more, and you see actually a bit of an increase in jazz clubs and just in general in live music in the especially in the outskirts more of Las Vegas where the residents live.
Gotcha.
Because a lot of people don't even realize, but there's over 2 million people living in Las Vegas now, and I just heard there's another 500,000 moving here in the next some 5 years or so. So it's not a small town,
No, not like what Nashville was the same way. Somebody told me the other day there's 140 people. I think that's the number. 140 or 150 people a day moving to Nashville, Tennessee. And Las Vegas, last time my wife and I were there, we would go every year to attend convention. And that's the last time you and I ran into each other, when you were playing at New York, New York.
Absolutely.
And, just the streets are so crowded in Las Vegas anymore. You don't even dare drive down the strip and the sidewalks, especially 9, 10 o'clock at night. So, yeah, I could believe it that Vegas is exploding. And I'm glad to hear that the jazz scene is really starting to take off there.
Yes, definitely way more. When I moved here, it was what you said, barely anything going on. But also there's a few venues, like professional venues now, like the Cabaret Jazz and Theater at the Smith Center, and they bring in a lot of acts and, SLS, and I can think of the name right now. There's a few casinos now which actually have also a lot of the big jazz acts coming through at least once or twice a year.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I just saw actually not too long ago Earl Klug playing Aliante Hotel. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Aliante Casino, and I think he's going to be back there soon too. So it's definitely an interest for it, for sure. I mean, it's obviously not like New York.
As we take a break here, get in our sponsors, I want to play another one of your cuts. We talked about this before the show. This is actually off of an album that is now out of print, but you said that the listeners can go ahead and download it if they'd like.
Yes, it's correct, yes.
Yeah, so this is off Dirk's 2012 Timeline album. This is the song My Revelation here on The Business Side of Music.
Next up, the Indie Artist Spotlight, brought to you by Reverb Nation.
Hi, this is Spencer,
And Sequoia.
and we are Spencer and Sequoia. We are two singer-songwriters that collaborate and harmonize to achieve a chill, jazzy pop sound that you can hear on our latest single, Best Thing, available on Reverb Nation.
The stars are looking like the moon sprinkled through the sky, and the sky itself, it looks pretty fine, and the clouds are full, even though it's still night time. The birds are singing, make the sounds look pretty, and I see reflects this big city, and the lights made by men will never outshine your room. My memories are you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Come to my heart, you know everything, and I want to know all about you. Ooh, no, you're everything that I'll ever need, even when life gets so frivolously complicated. They say they'll never see the wind, but leaves dance. Oh, they spin with that wind. So can't you see it? See it? They say that they'll never see you, but they'll always look outside their windows, not a picture painted by the fingers of a man, 'cause it can never stand for you. Oh, you know you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Come to my heart, you know everything, and I want to know all about you. Oh, no. Oh, no, you're everything that I'll ever need, even when life gets so frivolously complicated.
We are Spencer and Sequoia, and we're members of Reverb Nation.
You're listening to the business side of music.
This is Bob Bender. We're in the studio today with Dirk K, jazz guitarist. We've been listening to some of his music. We just played My Revelation off his 2012 Timeline album. You know, we talk about the jazz music scene, but one of the things that I've noticed in recent years, especially when I've been producing my syndicated jazz radio show, Jazz Nation, jazz radio has really changed. I mean, it used to be like in Los Angeles, you could listen to The Wave, and The Wave was the station in LA for jazz music, especially, you know, smooth jazz. And now when I turn on The Wave in Los Angeles, they're playing a little bit of everything. Are you seeing jazz radio changing?
Oh, absolutely, yes. When I first came into was I think late 90s, 1997, I think, when my debut album on Unity came out, Countdown Records. That was like the peak of smooth jazz, and I think they had like about 80 terrestrial stations playing 24/7 smooth jazz back then. And
Right.
I think now there are like 8 or 9 left, and then there are about 8 or 9 subscription-based stations like Sirius Radio, XM, and something like that, Music Choice. So basically everything else is going to the internet now, and people have their, what you do, like a podcast, or they have their live streaming radio show host on some server. So it changed it quite dramatically, actually. And so there's also so many different charts out now. It's like basically it's kind of really hard to tell nowadays what is even what. Used to be just, okay, here's the Billboard chart, and there was like a, landmark. But I think for jazz, they only have like 17 or 18 reporting stations nowadays. So it's really just a small percentage of what's out there on the radio, because there's hundreds of stations now on the internet. So it changed very much a lot. And for me, it's a big advantage because I can contact most of those people via email or via website, Facebook even. It's a good contact tool. And get in touch with most of the DJs personally, or with the, program director. So for me, it's a huge advantage, because in the old days, that was all taboo. I mean, you could not do it. There was certain rules. You had to have a record deal. They had like a radio promoter, this whole kind of thing, so it changed a lot. Yeah.
And I think it's actually changed for the better, because especially what we focus on our show here, we focus on the independent artist. We're not necessarily against the record label. It may come across that way sometimes in some of our interviews. That powerhouse, and we've discussed this many times, it's not as relevant as it used to be. So if it's easier for the artist, especially someone such as yourself, to get out there and get a hold of the program director and music director directly, and be able to create that one-on-one relationship without having to use a radio promotions team, because guess what? They cost money.
Yes.
And they don't always get the job done. And I don't necessarily think that internet radio is bad. I know that my wife and I, we have Sirius in our car. Every once in a while, I'll put it on one of the, I want to say it's probably, I think you're right, 7 or 8 jazz stations on there. Everything from smooth jazz to the standards to big band. I think that's vital. I think that internet radio is vital. I know that the one station that started me out with my jazz show was a very low wattage FM station. You could go around the corner and sneeze and maybe lose the signal, but they still had an audience. So I think any of those, I think any artist out there, but, we're talking about jazz, so any jazz artist out there, don't hesitate to reach out to those stations and get your music heard.
Yeah, also, I think a big advantage nowadays is that you have all the social media and streaming sites and all those things. And I think that's kind of the future is where you have like Spotify, Pandora on those places. You create those playlists, which is nothing else. That's basically what a radio station does, right? They create a playlist and basically create a program. So you can create your own program and playlist and distribute it to fans or people, and maybe get picked up by others, and then they maybe pick your song and onto a bigger playlist, and that kind of thing seems to be a new trend. So people just kind of creating their own radio show, as so to speak, although they call it playlists, but basically they just create the songs they like. For me, an advantage too is when I produce the CDs nowadays, I don't have to be so restricted anymore in terms to fit on a certain style of music. Because as you just played, you played like from my Timeline album, which is all guitar, all acoustic, which would never be played on a jazz station, right? Because it's it's just not jazz.
Right.
And then you play Carioca, which is kind of Brazilian influenced, which also probably wouldn't play on a jazz station. But then I have other albums they might play on it. So, but as an artist, I can just really dig into it and kind of, okay, that's what I want to do for this album. I just send it out, and then if people like it, they can play it and put it in their playlist, or they can put it on the internet radio stations. Just because they like the song, they might play it, not because it's a certain drawer it has to fit in. Does that make sense?
It does. So where do you see the future of jazz? The jazz music scene that I started out with back in the 70s, which would have been, Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock, and then evolving into Pat Metheny Group and Spyro Gyra, Yellow Jackets. There's so many artists out there now. It really does kind of become a busy expressway listening to jazz music. Do you see the future of jazz continuing to grow?
Well, I think There's a few new examples of bands which find their niche and then kind of get picked up. But all the people you just mentioned, they're still out there touring, so they're still basically doing it. And of course, they've been around for so long that they're into their own market, as you will. They go to Europe, to Japan, to God knows where, and they have an established market for them. But the downside is they have to constantly be on tour. For newer artists, it's basically to be able to create this demand. It's a little harder than it used to be, because I think in the old days it was okay. So let's say you're Pat Metheny and you get a ECM record deal. ECM has such a big network that automatically you're gonna get certain attention. Now, so the advantage of doing everything yourself is it's great, and you can be out there, but it's also a lot of people doing it, and you get overlooked easily too. So the future is kind of, I guess you have to find really a niche where you can excel at, create basically your own audience, but you have all the tools available like YouTube, Facebook, and all those things to get it out there, which was impossible before, So in order to tour, that's kind of rough because it's very expensive to do it. So it's just this kind of like the usual problem. Like if you're not big enough, if once you're there, it's easy, but how to get there, that's the big question, right?
Well, it is, and it's a conversation I've had with some jazz artists. I was working with a jazz vocalist out of East Tennessee for a while, and that was a conversation that she and I were having, and she was mostly looking for what we call in the business weekend warrior work, because she had a trio or a quartet that went with her, but it's finding those venues that you can perform in, but you really do have to create your core audience in order to be able to get those gigs.
Yeah, it's like either you do like for example in Las Vegas, I do a lot of those gigs where I'm getting hired, but I don't have to worry about promoting or anything. Like the gig you saw me playing, I'm playing that New York still on Sundays. There's a big stage now, and I'm playing on the stage, and people are already there. I don't have to even worry about it, which is great. And I'm getting paid. Awesome. But as soon as I want to play, let's say in Arizona in a club, it's like, why do people come out now to see me? What's the reason behind it? And why is somebody now spending $30, $40 maybe on a ticket? And that's kind of hard, because then you have to kind of create with your internet presence and all this YouTube and everything, such a big audience that people talk about it and kind of refer you or build up a hype in some ways, so to be able to go to a city where you don't live and people are still willing to go and see you. It's definitely tough. It takes a lot of energy and work.
I think what you're doing is you're definitely sharing some information. My last question before we go, and I want to play cut off your brand new album, which just came out, I understand, correct?
On internet, iTunes, etc., it's been out since November, but the physical CD just came out yesterday, so it's brand new.
Gotcha.
And
perfect timing.
What I do nowadays, for example, I released a couple singles first. It's the title track is called Blue Sky of the new album, so I had this already in the radio 1.5 years ago, and it actually went up all the way to number 7 in the charts. In some charts, but it was overall a top 100 of the year song. And then I had another one, Change Is Gonna Come, went really well. So my next single is gonna be called Can't Let Go, and it's featuring also the bass player Al Turner, known for Earl Klug. He's working with Bob James and also, I'm working here with a drummer from Rome, Italy, in Las Vegas. His name's Andrea D'Angelo. He's playing on it. And I play all the other instruments, but that's going to be the next single. And it's also the first track on the CD called Can't Let Go.
We'll play that cut before we leave here. Any advice you want to give to anyone wanting to get into the jazz music scene? Any valuable lessons that you've learned that might be helpful?
First problem is if you say jazz, that's a huge variety of where you want to be. Could be anything from like big band to Kenny G sound to avant-garde jazz. So first of all, you have to figure out where you want to be in the specific jazz field, and then of course every field has certain rules of of engagement, so to speak. Like if I want to be in a very serious jazz field, probably the best way is to go study at a good conservatory and try to somewhat meet Chick Corea at some point. And, but if, for example, smooth jazz, it's more like song-based, composition-based music, and it's a whole different arena, or so there's so many things, so it's really hard to answer this question. So first you have to kind of figure out where do you want to be as an artist, or do you want to be even an artist? You want to be a sideman in jazz, or you want to be...
Put your thinking cap on and figure out what you want to do.
Exactly. I mean, that's what I would say. It's the more you can zoom in into a certain specific style of jazz, then it becomes clearer of where you want to be or what you want to do, where the venues are, who are the people you actually want to work with, and that kind of thing, so that's
some good advice. Dirk, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It was awesome.
Yeah, we're gonna close out this episode here off of Dirk's new album titled Blue Sky. This is his cut, Can't Let Go. If you're interested in learning more about our show, drop us a line at musicpodcast@mail.com. That's musicpodcast@mail.com. If you have any suggestions of persons or topics that involve some facet of the music industry that you'd like to hear about on our podcast, please feel free to let us know. You can follow us on Facebook on the Business Side of Music podcast page. You can also find us on Twitter at Music Business Podcast. Also, if you're listening to this podcast on iTunes, post a review on what you think of our show. This is Bob Bender, and you've been listening to this edition of The Business Side of Music.
The Business Side of Music is the creation of Tom Sabella and Tracy Snow and is produced by Bob Bender. Co-producer for the show is Vinny Rebus. The Business Side of Music is recorded at Music Dog Studios in Los Angeles, California and Nashville, Tennessee. Production sound designed by Keith Stark. Voiceover and promo by Lisa Fuson.